Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources, distill the critical knowledge, and hand you the intellectual keys. Today, we are really digging into a huge topic, resilient leadership, specifically what our research calls thriving against the odds.
And that's the key word, isn't it? Thriving. This is about more than just surviving. The whole premise here is, well, it's pretty profound. What if all those things you try to avoid, the disruptions, the personal setbacks, are actually the very moment shaping you into the leader you're meant to be?
Exactly, and let's just be honest about the world we're all leading in. The sources really hammer this home: changes faster, expectations are higher, and you're constantly making these high-stakes calls with, incomplete information.
And that's just the external stuff. Underneath all that, so many leaders are fighting these quiet, personal battles that their teams never see. So adversity isn't some rare interruption anymore.
No, it's the atmosphere.
It is. And when that's the atmosphere, you can't rely on things going your way. So our mission today is to pull out the actionable frameworks from this material, the things that help you turn hardship from a threat into a real catalyst, a catalyst for clarity, for wisdom, and for lasting impact.
An inner resilience that can't be duplicated. I love that phrase.
That's the advantage we're looking for.
Okay, so let's start with that core idea, that big reframing. To thrive, you have to make a huge mental shift. You have to stop seeing hardship as an inconvenience or a threat and start seeing it as one of the most potent catalysts for growth.
So easy to say that.
Oh, it's incredibly hard to do when you're in it.
It is, because when you're in the middle of a crisis, say a massive financial hit reaction, the human reaction is, why me? But that question puts you in the role of a victim.
It's a dead end.
It's a total dead end. The leaders who thrive, they shift the question. They start asking, what is God doing in me through this? And that one change, that moves you from victimhood to vocation, from a personal attack to a process with a purpose.
So, the deep truth here is that the person who comes out the other side of the fire is just fundamentally stronger, wiser, more grounded.
The process itself is the point.
Let's get into where that strength comes from. Leadership forged in crisis. The sources are really clear on this. Every single leader eventually has a moment where the bottom just falls out.
It's universal, and it might be a huge visible catastrophe, a team imploding, a lawsuit, but it could also be something much quieter.
Like burnout.
Exactly, that slow erosion of passion, that feeling of spiritual numbness where the work just feels meaningless. And in that moment, you learn a fundamental truth. Your leadership isn't really built when things go to plan. It's forged when everything changes.
And this is where the sources point to this powerful, almost counterintuitive pattern. They call it the unraveling, the idea that leadership rarely starts when you're at the peak of your confidence.
It's the complete opposite, actually. Think about the examples given. God almost always calls people after a failure or when they're in total obscurity. Moses is 80 years old.
After failing, after decades in exile, just tending sheep, his confidence is gone.
Completely gone. Or look at Joseph. He only gets into power after being betrayed, sold into slavery, thrown in prison. I mean, that's a long, hard education in humility before you're handed the keys to the kingdom.
And David is anointed when no one's even looking at him. And then he spends years on the run. Gideon is literally hiding in a wine press out of fear when he's called to lead.
So it's clear, the making of a leader often starts in a place of total disorientation.
Which brings up the big question, why? Why is this necessary? And the research gives 5 really specific reasons why hardship seems to come before impact.
And they all connect to the leader's formation.
Okay, let's break them down. The first one is huge. Trials strip away our illusions of self-sufficiency. What does that look like today for an executive?
It looks like the CEO who can't take feedback, or the manager who thinks their past success guarantees the future. It's the leader who truly believes they are the source of all the good ideas. That person will eventually collapse under that pressure. Adversity forces you to look for a source outside yourself.
And the second reason is that trials sharpen discernment. With all the noise we face today, how does suffering help with that?
Because it forces you to get clear on what actually matters. It cuts through the noise. When you've faced a real existential threat to your organization, you stop wasting time on petty office drama. You learn the difference between what's urgent and what's truly important.
Okay, number 3. Trials purify our motives. This one feels critical because ambition and the need for approval can be so toxic.
They're poison. Adversity is like a fire that burns away the impurities. It reveals if you're really leading for the mission or if you're just doing it for the praise, for the validation.
And the fourth, trials cultivate empathy. I mean, this one feels obvious, but it's so important.
You just can't lead people through suffering if you don't understand it yourself, not as an idea, but as an experience.
It gives your leadership a different kind of weight.
Absolutely. And that leads to the fifth point. Trials deepen your spiritual authority. It's not just about belief, it's about depth. The weight of real leadership requires a foundation that, as the sources argue, is forged through intense experience, through walking with God in the middle of the fire.
That's a perfect setup for the inner work. So, section 2. The argument is that when all this external pressure is mounting, your inner life becomes the main battlefield, which brings us to this essential triad of inner resilience.
Right. Spiritual, emotional, and cognitive strength. And this is where we get really practical. The first pillar is spiritual resilience, being anchored in God.
So, practically speaking, how does something like prayer or scripture meditation actually give a leader a strategic advantage when they're walking into a hostile board meeting?
It creates better,
Mm.
better decision hygiene. It slows you down. Prayer becomes this lifeline to process pressure, so you stop making reactionary choices. And meditation, or even just a deep reflection on your core mission, it pulls your focus away from the immediate panic and back to the long-term purpose.
It's that idea of surrendered obedience. You surrender the need to control everything.
Yes. You accept you don't have all the answers, but you stay true to the mission. The case study on Daniel is perfect here. His faith didn't remove the lions, but his inner resilience meant he could face them with total clarity. The external threat couldn't break his internal compass.
Okay, so pillar 2 is emotional resilience, strengthening the heart.
This is your ability to feel all the pressure, the fear, the frustration without being controlled by it.
But let's be real. How do you model composure for your team when internally you are absolutely panicking?
That's where the practice comes in. First, self-awareness. You have to recognize your emotional triggers before they hijack you. Then self-regulation, which is really just practicing the pause, that little gap between feeling an impulse and acting on it.
That's where your intellect can catch up.
Exactly. And you have to model hope. Look, strength isn't about the absence of emotion. It's about a disciplined engagement with it. You feel it, you process it, but you act based on your values.
And that brings us to the third pillar, mental resilience, thinking clearly when the world is chaotic.
This demands specific habits. First, ruthless prioritization. Focus on the 2 or 3 things that truly matter and let the rest go. Second, adaptability. Be flexible in your methods, but absolutely rigid on your mission. You can change the route, but not the destination.
And what about problem framing?
That one is so powerful. It's the ability to see an obstacle not as proof that you're a failure, but simply as a solvable problem that needs a new approach.
And this all comes back to a paradox the sources highlight, which is in that quote from Paul, "My power is made perfect in weakness." As leaders, we hate feeling weak. So how do you leverage a limitation instead of just trying to hide it?
You have to see that your weakness isn't a liability to be hidden. It's the very canvas on which real strength is displayed. When you're open about not having all the answers, when you rely on your team, on a higher power, that communicates humility. It actually builds trust. It allows a power beyond your own to work through your limitations, not around them.
Okay, so once that inner foundation is solid, it has to translate into action. That's section 3, leading through turbulence. This is where resilience becomes visible.
And the very first strategy is to lead with presence. In a crisis, your team is watching you. Your actions and your attitude speak so much louder than your words. You have to be visibly engaged.
You have to acknowledge the reality of the crisis.
You do. But you also have to model composure. The example of Nehemiah is perfect. He prayed, he planned, yes. But then he went to the wall himself. He didn't just send memos. Your physical presence, your calm demeanor, that's your leadership signature in a storm.
Right. And right after presence comes the need to communicate clearly and frequently, because confusion just breeds fear.
And fear will destabilize a team faster than anything.
But what do you say when you honestly don't have the answers? You can't just make things up.
No, you prioritize transparency. You give regular updates, even if the update is, look, we're still figuring this out. Here's what we know for sure. Here's what we don't know. And here are the 2 things we're doing tomorrow. That kind of measured communication stops the rumor mill and builds incredible trust.
Third strategy, prioritize and delegate strategically. This is so hard in a crisis because everything feels like a 5-alarm fire.
And if you try to put them all out yourself, you will burn out fast. Resilient leaders are masters of triage. The sources point to Jesus delegating the practical care of the crowds to his disciples. He focused on the critical spiritual teaching while empowering others to handle the logistics.
So delegation isn't just offloading work.
Not at all. It's developing your team and preserving your own energy for the decisions that only you can make.
Okay, next up is the need to anticipate and adapt. It's not just about surviving this storm, but thinking about the next one.
That's the strategic mind at work. The story of Joseph in Egypt is a masterclass. He hears the dream, interprets the warning, and then implements this massive, flexible, long-term plan. 7 years of preparation. That kind of foresight saved nations. It separates the reactors from the true leaders.
And finally, since leadership is never a solo mission, the fifth strategy is building resilient teams.
You have to. You invest in your people, you build a culture of accountability, and you recognize their contributions, especially in the storm. Your team will always reflect your own stability. You have to intentionally build your resilience into the organization's DNA.
Now we have to shift to the long view, sustaining this over a lifetime. Leadership is a marathon, and you need endurance when the pressure is just relentless.
And that endurance is built on 3 foundations. First, an anchored faith, a deep belief that God is sovereign and trials have a purpose. Think of Abraham waiting decades for a promise to be fulfilled. That's patience rooted in purpose.
The second is a vision-centered purpose. You have to know your why.
You have to. That why is the fuel you burn when your personal energy tank is empty. Nehemiah had that unwavering focus on rebuilding the walls. Everything else was secondary.
And third, practice discipline, the daily habits.
Yes. Daniel didn't start praying 3 times a day when the threat appeared. He was already doing it. It's the consistent, sometimes boring, daily disciplines that build stamina for the long haul.
And we have to touch on the difference between simple optimism and real hope. The sources cite Romans 5 here.
It's a critical distinction. Optimism is based on favorable conditions. Oh, things will get better. Hope is anchored in God's character. It says, I can endure this no matter the outcome because of what I believe.
Suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character. And character, hope.
Exactly. Hope takes the suffering and turns it from a dead weight into a vehicle for real growth.
Before we wrap up, there's a final warning in the material about the invisible storm. The internal crisis of doubt and fear.
Which is often the most dangerous battlefield of all. You have to cultivate emotional honesty. Look at David in the Psalms. He's raw, he's emotional, but it never completely cancels out his faith. And you must reframe failure.
This is key.
Failure is going to happen, but a resilient leader sees it as feedback, which leads to humility and learning. An unhealthy leader sees it as punishment, which leads to shame and bitterness.
Peter's denial is the ultimate example, isn't it? A massive public failure, but it led to restoration, not the end of his story.
It refined him because he faced it. So ultimately, thriving leadership emerges when you get this convergence of faith, that anchor in something bigger, with emotional intelligence and finally strategic action. The 3 have to work together.
And when they do, that resilience becomes a kind of spiritual witness. It shows your team that courage and hope aren't just tied to the quarterly numbers, but to something deeper. And that's what inspires people to persevere. The journey isn't about getting to the end. It's about who you become on the way.
And that brings us to the final provocative thought our research leaves for you. If every storm you overcome becomes strength you can then pass on to others, what specific resilience rhythm, maybe it's dedicated time for reflection, a non-negotiable spiritual practice, or even just enforced rest, what one rhythm will you commit to today to ensure your current challenges leave a positive, sustainable legacy for those you lead?